We're talking about rivalries here. You were there for the Letterman and Leno rivalry. What was it like to live it every day?
So there were always things that would come up in the newspapers and on TV. Like Andrew said, there was every move was being watched, and there were books written about it, and people actually cared about like who was ahead now and who had the better guess then. But I have to say, like, working at the show, we were focused on David Letterman's Late Show. Like, nobody would walk around saying, "Did you see what Leno did last night?" That might have been different for the people that booked the guests, but as far as comedy on the show, we were kind of competing against ourselves. When I started working there, it was in '97, and the show had been on for 12 years already. So we were just trying to come up with stuff that was good enough to pitch to Dave that hadn't been done before. Like somebody would come up with an idea we would think was hilarious. We would like put it in pitch form, get ready to go, and then there was a guy who had like the records of everything would say, "Well, no, they did that in '84, and then they did that in '92."
Oh no!
Like, come on. But there definitely was a rivalry. In fact, you guys played that clip before, and that really was when Leno became number one after that with the "What the hell were you thinking" clip. And then
the interview with Hugh Grant,
with Hugh Grant. And I remember 2 years later, we came into work one day as at 53rd and Broadway, and people were freaking out because you could look out the window and maybe like 6 or 7 blocks away, all of a sudden overnight, it was put up a giant billboard of Jay Leno's face, and it said #1 in late night. And we're like, God damn it. and so getting calls from Page Six and from the Daily News, and because people really cared about all this stuff, and it's like, what's Letterman going to do? And it's a shot across the bow. The executive producer at the time had the best idea, which was the next day we put up a billboard on the other side of the street, which is it's facing the same direction. So on the left it said Jay Leno #1 in late night, and on the right it said Dave Letterman #3 in late night. And we just you want to screw with us? We're gonna have a better joke than you. So it was great. It was up for a long time, and yeah, I felt good about that.
Eric, I have a sort of a history question. Going back, yes. I've heard people say that Jay Leno in the 70s, when him and Letterman were coming up as stand-ups, was irreverent and sort of a comic. And then the shows seemed the opposite, where Leno was more mainstream and Letterman was more irreverent. Was there sort of a flip-flop there?
I think it was a strategy. I do think that, like, the Tonight Show when Carson had it appealed to everybody. Like, he purposely didn't make it. He made political jokes, but it was about both sides, and so that appealed to everyone. And Leno very much did the same thing, because if you just stick to one side, you're gonna alienate half your audience. Leno and Dave started out at the Comedy Store together in L.A., and Leno was on the old Late Night with David Letterman all the time, and he was a great guest, and they were really funny together. But I think Jay sort of eased into the Leno that he became when he was doing the Tonight Show, and he was just, "Oh, shucks, it's me, Jay Leno." And he wore denim all the time for some reason.
He loves that. He loves the denim on top and the denim on the bottom. And that's how you know he's the everyman. Eric Stangel is joining us. He's the former showrunner for David Letterman. We're talking about the greatest television rivalries of all time. And, of course, Letterman and Leno, as Perloff has chosen them as the #1 rivalry. We're getting a little vibe of what it was like on the front lines. Do you think that you mentioned about Letterman and Leno and coming up together in L.A. comedy scene in the 70s, but did they like each other when you were working with Dave? Like, what was the relationship, do you think, like between them?
I think they both were extremely competitive, obviously, and I do think it was a healthy competition. They both wanted to be #1, and I think, but at the same time, like, there's a famous story that there was one year that at CBS we had the Super Bowl, and so they gave us a 30-second promo during the Super Bowl, which is huge for us because that's a gigantic audience, and it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And so we're like, do we get president. We wanted to do something with George W. Bush because Dave was going in on him every single night for stuff he was doing. It would have been great to have a promo with him. President said no. This was when Conan had been forced off the Tonight Show. We're like, Conan O'Brien would be great to do it with. He couldn't do it. So Dave had the idea to do the promo for the Super Bowl with Oprah and Jay Leno, and they both said yes, but the stipulation was that the whole thing had to be a secret. And so only a few people at the show knew that this was going to be shot. So a few weeks before the Super Bowl, there was one night after we taped the show, there was a set built, and nobody knew what it was for, but everybody knew that we were taping something very quickly. And a limousine showed up outside, and Oprah showed up with a hoodie on, and nobody knew it was her. She went in, nobody saw her. And then apparently Jay Leno came in a disguise. Like, I don't know what that meant, but he did show up in a disguise. And so people were on the set. I knew who was coming. The director knew who was coming. A couple other people knew, but not everybody did. And Oprah comes to the set, and she's sitting there. And then Jay Leno walks out, and you hear people go, like he broke into the set. So it's like, well, no. And one of the stagehands came over to me, and he said, Eric, you want me to do something about him? And I was like, no, what are you going to do, go beat him up? He's not, like, here to steal our jokes. He's the guy in the thing. And so, yeah, so we shot a piece with him, and we held the secret, and then it was pretty good. Find it online.
I don't want to waste your time on this debate because it's obviously, not necessarily your specialty, but we are totally on different pages here. I do not remember the 90s a Friends-Seinfeld rivalry. I felt like everyone I knew, a lot of people watched the same shows and they built off each other. They were on the same network. How do you remember those two shows?
I remember it. I don't remember it as much of a rivalry as it is now. I remember they got huge numbers. It was only kind of after the fact when everything was in rerun, to my recollection, where people were like, I'm a Friends person, I'm a Seinfeld person. And, yeah, so, like, they were both huge shows. And, by the way, you were talking about Frasier before. Even though you guys don't like it, I looked it up. It got, like, a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is, like, it's still an all-time show. NBC had these huge shows. And now networks barely have sitcoms anymore. And nothing's in production. So we got to get back to doing good shows.
I know.
Getting fair deals for the writers and the actors, and let's get that done.
Well, definitely. As a consumer of all of your incredible content, we're hoping that the writers and the actors can, come to an agreement, something that's fair for them so that we can get our great shows back. Okay, last one for you. Just have a couple minutes left, but you're a massive L.A. Chargers fan. I mean, you've really been with them, Eric, through thick and thin.
No, just thick.
I was going to say, or how do you put that? Or just thin? I don't know. But it's
thin, but it's not both.
It's definitely not. It's been a lot of down times. Do you feel like this is finally the year for the Chargers?
As I say every year, this is finally the year. I mean, I actually think they're one of the teams that just has to get to the postseason. I used to worry about how are they going to win the division, how are they going to do that. They just have to be healthy enough. There was somebody came up with a metric last season of the most injured teams, and everybody was fairly close together, and then the Chargers were way above everybody else.
You lead the league in something.
Yeah, right. They have trouble putting on their pants. I think they need to bring in somebody to show them how to put their uniform on properly. But I really do think that the window is really, really small right now. They got a bunch of guys who are getting paid over $20 million a year, and there will be cap casualties next year. You can't have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack and, obviously the big number for Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler. They're not going to pay him. So I feel like they have all these guys now. They better get it done, or else, I'm at the point where I'm calculating how much time I have left on the earth and how many seasons are left. Because you take that for granted and then you don't win, and you're like, oh, my God.
Maggie's a Bills fan. She
Yeah,
relates
I
to
know,
that
I know.
100%.
I've done that math.
Yeah,
It's not pretty.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get. Well, I mean, yeah. So you and I are kind of the same here.
I know.
It's going to happen this year for the Bills, right?
No, because it's never going to happen.
You're doing the reverse jinx.
Can I suggest something, Eric? You should try what I do as an Eagles fan. Win one, then everything is easier.
Yeah, thanks, Perloff.
I need that. I'm trying. What else do I have to do?